what you doing?
Oh, hi, Daniel. I'm trying to figure out how plants grow.
Well, that's easy because water, sunlight, air.
That's it?
Yeah.
Did you just say what again?
Water, sunlight, air.
Sunlight and air, and that's it?
Yeah.
That's all it takes for these plants to grow?
Yeah, because they need vegetables also.
Well, you know what? I think I've heard of that before. You know what it might be called? Photosynthesis.
What's photosynthesis?
I think that's the whole thing that you just described. It's a cycle of sunlight, right?
Yeah.
Water.
Air.
And the air that makes plants grow. Hey, Daniel, check it out. See those kids over there?
Yeah.
Do you think they'd be interested in learning how that works?
Yeah.
Should we be the ones to show them?
Yeah.
Let's
do it.
Let's go.
Ah!
Oh, hello, Steve. All right. Well, let's see here. A little water. Oh, somebody there? Hello? Oh, hello. Well, you caught me gardening a little bit, but I think, as you heard at the beginning, we're going to do exactly what Daniel said. We're going to learn a little bit about the chemistry behind photosynthesis today. And to make our plants here grow, he's exactly right. We need things like sunlight. We need things like water. And of course, we're going to need the air, but a very specific chemical that's in the air. Come on, let's go find out more about it. All right. So, caught me gardening a little bit there, but that's okay. Don't need my gloves right now. I might be able to lose the hat. So, as we were stating, clearly this is a marvel of chemistry. Photosynthesis, you heard me right earlier talking to Daniel. Photosynthesis is what we're going to focus on today. And he really nailed it out of the park. To have this occur, you need some very complex chemistry to occur, but it really only takes 3 key ingredients. Now, he mentioned air. As far as the air is concerned, remember, air is a heterogeneous mixture. It's made of lots of different things and chemical compounds. Number 1, like what we like to live off of, O2, oxygen gas. Now, the plant cycle isn't going to need that, and it's not part of the reactant series for it. Neither is the nitrogen in the air yet, but the key ingredient it is going to need is CO2. So our plant here, Steve, really likes CO2. Now remember, that's pretty fundamental. That's what we breathe out, okay? As we breathe that out, it adds to the air and it adds to our atmosphere, and it's going to work its way over into Steve. But the next key ingredient, as Daniel stated, is going to need to be something that we were using this for. That's right, water. Water is going to be the next key ingredient to give Steve energy. But it doesn't work with just CO2 and water. Now remember, you can directly add the water, as you saw here, or it can come from the atmosphere, rain, or even in the air molecules themselves. The air that you're breathing in has humidity. That humidity is a containment of vaporized water that's in the air as it evaporates up. So the plants absorb that water. They absorb our CO2. But one thing they desperately need was the last key ingredient that without it, none of this would work. And that was, you got it.
Go. Ooh, yeah. It's a beautiful day and awesome. Thumbs up, kids.
Sunlight. So let's break that down into a chemical equation, balance that equation, and have a really key understanding of how carbon chemistry comes full circle here in the process of photosynthesis. And in that process, I think you're going to see that the reactants that make these new products are vital in life as we know it. Let's take it to the board and check it out. All right. So, the hat's back. I'll move it. Now that we know what we're talking about today, the carbon chemistry of photosynthesis, what we're going to have to do is to break that down chemically. Now, as Daniel stated at the beginning, three key ingredients are going to come together here to make the reactants. Number one is we're going to need some water. So, write this down with me. We're going to spell out the chemical equation, H2O. We're going to add to that the gas that's necessary for this to work. And to add to that, the gas that's going to be necessary for this to work is going to be our CO2. I'm going to leave myself a little bit of room here because we do want to balance this at the end of the day. And then finally, the key ingredient that everything needs is going to be sunlight. Now, sunlight, what we in chemistry talk about, is energy. Energy is what goes into this process. Now, there's no need for a coefficient for energy because remember, it's massless. It doesn't take up any physical space. So because of that, the energy that goes into it, and due to the conservation of it, is reserved for the other side. Remember, the energy in chemistry is held in those bonds. So the H and the O, between those two hydrogens and that one oxygen, there's bonds between the valence electrons. That's where all the chemistry, energy, lies. So when we put energy into the equation, we're acknowledging the fact that sunlight has to be a producer for the products. It's a reactant on this side, but it doesn't have any mass, it doesn't take up space. So the energy put into it is going to be to tear apart these molecules to make something new on the other side. Now let's step over and see what happens. We've been talking about carbon chemistry. So the products on this side of the equation are going to end up being something very familiar if you go back to lessons. It's actually going to be the polyatomic ion, the smallest unit constituent of it, glucose, which bound around itself multiple times. You take glucose and turn it into another chain of another glucose and turn it into another chain of another glucose. You end up getting those sucroses and those fructoses, and finally you get to what is the base unit of what we were looking for, carbohydrates. So what we get is glucose, and the formula for that was C6H12O6. And the final key ingredient, the thing that we must all need to get this to produce, and what we as humans are really, really happy that this whole reaction creates, oxygen gas. And remember, that's not just O, because it's a diatomic molecule, we have to write O2. So there you have it. This is the chemical equation for photosynthesis. Now, if you're looking at it like I am and saying, well, that's not balanced. Well, that's okay. We can balance the equation. And I would ask you honestly, try it yourself. Pause the video, write down the equation, and see if you can balance this equation. I'll give you a second. Okay, now that you've done it, let's check our work. We're going to move back to the other side. And because the reactants need to balance out with the products, we're only dealing with three types of elements here. Your hydrogen, your oxygen, and your carbon. No, this is not a combustion reaction. That would mean that all the trees breathe in and then explode. Not the case here. Even though we're making oxygen is a product over here and carbon dioxide and water on one side of it, this in itself is photosynthesis. So what we're going to need to have happen here is a balancing act. So on this side, you're going to need 6 waters. They will combine with 6 carbon dioxides, equal parts, and they're going to make 1 glucose molecule. Now think about that. That whole thing has to have a lot of energy to be put together. All those bonds, there's a lot of them, have to have a lot of energy input to them. And then we're going to make 6 oxygen molecules at the very end. So our coefficients, if you've tried this at home and pat yourself on the back if you got the coefficients being 6, 6, 1, 6 as written. Again, I want to remind you, there is no coefficient for the use of the energy in this equation, and the reason for that is because energy is massless. It just is constituting all of the molecules that are being made on the product side because, again, without sunlight, we won't get photosynthesis. Now, let's take this and look at what happens on the other side of it. So what just happened there? The plant's breathing, right? Well, it makes sense. It's taking in carbon dioxide, the stuff we expel, the plant's breathing in. And what it's doing is breathing back out the oxygen that we need. And what do we call this? We call it cellular respiration. Now remember, this whole photosynthesis that's occurring is a big leap forward for you to understand the carbon chemistry that's going to walk you towards biology. Ooh, voodoo science. Now, let's make sure we understand what cellular respiration is talking about. If you've got your textbook, this chapter has a wonderful diagram. I'm going to use the chemistry to diagram it here. So we're going to draw some arrows to show us where it comes from and what happens. Now remember, it's all about whatever photosynthesis is occurring, and photosynthesis is happening because of all of the reactants. So what goes into making photosynthesis? Well, the water goes into making photosynthesis. The oxygen goes into making photosynthesis, and the energy goes into making photosynthesis. That's on the front end. That's the part of photosynthesis, but the exhale that the plant gives is the cellular respiration side of it. And what happens there is we get our glucose sugar, or what most would call, because a lot of these get made in the process, are your carbohydrates. That's what comes out during cellular respiration. And this goes into storage things that the plant needs, like growing new roots, new branches, new leaves. All of the things that literally the plant does to grow happens because this is produced from photosynthesis. But the big important byproduct for us as humans that comes out of this is that we get oxygen gas. And all the animals and all the plants would agree, all the animals, including us, would agree that we are very thankful, but the plants are giving off that oxygen. And the reason for that is because it's going to go right back in us, and we are going to expel carbon dioxide, which goes into the back of byproduct of photosynthesis, completing the cycle back to cellular respiration, to photosynthesis, back to respiration again. And remember, one last thing that comes out, if energy is being put into a system, we remember back in our physics days, everything's conserved energy-wise, even in chemistry, and that does mean that the energy also goes back out of the system. And what that leads us to is a really interesting thing. This process, it's not an equilibrium process by any means, but we can write it up as such because what goes in from the reactant side to make the products can be what we call the reverse reaction in the other way. These would become the reactants for cellular respiration. These would become the products of cellular respiration. So if we're talking about cellular respiration and not photosynthesis, the arrow, the yield, actually goes in the opposite direction. Remember, cellular respiration happens when the glucose and the oxygen plus the energy yield energy, carbon dioxide, and water. It's that ebb and flow that makes nature work so well. Now we could say, in this case, we have an equilibrium reaction, but that's not the case. It's either happening through photosynthesis or it's happening through cellular respiration. And the arrow, or in fact, if I were writing cellular respiration, I would again put my reactants on the left side, basically flipping the entire equation so that my products end up on the right side. So just make a note of that. This is one thing that you will definitely focus on after you've talked about cells and cellular development through what we call carbon chemistry. And on that note, let me take you on a brief tour, a very short one, of what essentially is all the missing ingredients from chemistry that is organically produced. So what we call organic chemistry is the thing that we're going to take a look at next. Hold on one second. There we go. Now we're really ready to talk about organic chemistry. I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail here, but I do want all of you to take away one really important concept here. And I've got a great way to memorize it. And it's not really memorizing it. It's really more important that you understand what the root of organic chemistry is. And it only has to deal with 4 key ingredient elements. Number 1 is the same number 1 that's on the periodic table. That's right, it's hydrogen, of course. So hydrogen, as we see it on the periodic table, is number 1. Hydrogen is one of the key ingredients in life, as you can imagine. I mean, we wouldn't have water without hydrogen. So with the hydrogen that we have, hydrogen is one of the most important ingredients in organic chemistry. The next one comes along, and it's fairly important to you and me, as you can tell. It's the other part of water. It's what you're living on right now. It's oxygen. Now, oxygen's another important element. We're on number 8 on the periodic table here, and we're going to stay pretty close to oxygen as we move on. We're going to move back to number 7 on the periodic table. And if you're looking for number 7, what you're really talking about is nitrogen. Nitrogen, we haven't talked a lot about in carbon chemistry. We haven't used a lot of nitrogen in carbon chemistry. But let me tell you something really awesome about nitrogen. Number 1, it's the most dominant element in the atmosphere right now. It is a diatomic molecule, so when it shows up in the air you're breathing, it's in 2, all right? But the weird thing about it is you wouldn't survive without nitrogen. We've talked about this before in the classroom, but you wouldn't survive without nitrogen. But even though it's in about 70% of every breath you take, your body can't absorb it. That's wasted space in your lungs, only to be filled with the remaining oxygen in the air that you can process and use and live off of. But you wouldn't be around for very long if you didn't have nitrogen. So there's an interesting thing later on next year that you'll talk about called the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen's vital. And then the air, as it penetrates into the soil and goes around the plants can process nitrogen in the nitrogen cycle. And what they typically do is they absorb it through their root systems, and then the plants now have nitrogen infused into them, and from that we pick up the plants and we eat them, and therefore we get the nitrogen from them, the vital nitrogen that your body needs. Or maybe a little animal comes along and it eats the plants, absorbing the nitrogen, and then we eat that animal, and then we get the nitrogen from it. So it's the nitrogen cycle, as you can see. This is a vital key ingredient for organic chemistry. And the last, but definitely not least, probably one of the most, all of these are mostly important in organic chemistry. Let's be serious. There's only 4 of them. And then there's a few others that come along the way to make it really complex. But the last main key ingredient in organic chemistry is this, carbon. Number 6 on the periodic table, 6, 7, 8, and 1 on the periodic table. Now, this is patent pending. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a solid yes that this one is mine, but I'm going to share it with you. Don't tell anybody else. A great way to remember the organic chemistry 4 key ingredients is honk if you heart organic chemistry. If you honk, that's going to be my new bumper sticker, by the way. I'm really hoping that this patent comes through because I want to see these on the back of every car when we start driving around again. Organic chemistry. Honk if you heard organic chemistry. HONC, the 4 key ingredients to understanding how life on Earth works in very complex ways, but it's not so complex when you break it down into the 4 key ingredients. Hope you enjoyed that one. Ah! Oh, hi! Oh, the hat's back. So, let's talk really quickly about enzymes and vitamins. Now, your body needs them, and here's why. If you're doing activities, if you're being active, heck, if you're just sitting there on the couch, your body and the cells that make it up are doing a lot of work, and they need a lot of energy, and they need it really quickly. But sometimes, just because of the sheer nature of the cell and how it works, they don't work fast enough to produce the kind of energy that your body needs. In steps something like an enzyme. Now, enzymes are really good at taking proteins and breaking them down, sometimes like in your stomach. And they need things that are acidic to do so. Lemons and limes, and especially your stomach, have acids inside of there that activate enzymes which allow for them to tear apart things like proteins, which are in the foods that you eat, and they help them break it down. And this speeds up the process of how quickly the cell can get that energy that it vitally needs for you to grow and be healthy. Now, on the other hand, we also need vitamins. Again, our good old friends here, lime and lemon, are going to give us plenty of vitamins, and the one that they definitely are packed full of are vitamin C. Now, you're familiar with that. You know that citrus, like oranges, lemons, and limes, all have vitamin C in them. Lots of things do, but they're vitally important to you. See, you need vitamin C to have a balanced, healthy body. Without it, things start to happen that are very bad for you. Your body doesn't do well without vitamin C. In fact, if you go back into the times when sailors were journeying across the oceans for long distances over long periods of time, one of the things that would start to happen to them is they would develop these symptoms of something called scurvy. No, it's not a made-up pirate word. It actually is a bad disease that starts to affect the body. And the only way to combat it is vitamin C. By the time the sailors figured this out, they needed to supplement something else in their body besides meat and potatoes. So they made sure that they packed the ship full of things that had vitamin C in them that would keep their body nutrient and full of vitamins. Other things that are important to the body might be some types of metals, which enzymes and vitamins both help introduce in a healthy way. Now, a metal that might be in your body that you're very familiar with is iron. Iron's necessary for the blood to function properly in our bodies. And without it, you can become anemic. Now, this is a disease that afflicts people that have a low iron count. They have an iron deficiency, not enough iron in their system. So they might have to take a supplement. Supplements that we take all the time are things like vitamins to help our enzymes break down the things that we consume and produce energy in our cells faster than the cell itself can do. And that's what's awesome about this relationship between plants and us, animals, between the air that we breathe out to give them air to respirate back to us, to the foods and nutrients that they provide to our bodies, like vitamins to help our enzymes break down things faster. It's all this marvelous tale, but it goes back to the heart of chemistry and what we've been focusing on for the past few weeks. Carbon chemistry. That's right. The chemistry of carbon helps everything come full circle. And what ties it all together is going to be how we can have this balance in chemistry. And I go back to almost the very beginning of our time together, when we found that in nature there is always a balance of energy and matter. And then we start to look at how chemical equations come from the reactant side to the product side. And what did we have to do to that? We had to balance it. And the only way to keep ourselves in balance is to make sure that we understand underneath everything lies this symmetry of chemistry. And in that chemistry, we can figure out just God's plan of order and balance. Well, Daniel, we're at the end of another lesson. Do you think the kids get it?
Yeah.
What are the 3 things plants need to grow?
Air, water, sunlight.
Bingo. And you know what that makes? Photosynthesis.
Yeah!
But you know what's super cool about photosynthesis? Is that the plants breathe in what we breathe out, and that we get to breathe in what they breathe out in cellular respiration.
Yeah!
How cool is that?
Yeah!
Now, Daniel, we're wrapping this up. So what do we typically say at the end of our videos?
Thumbs up if you like this video.
I agree. You can pound it. Boo! Have a great one. Okay, now that we've done all of the things for photosynthesis, cellular respiration, enzymes, vitamins, and a little bit of organic chemistry, I'm going to send you off now to do your homework. But here's a reminder. Next week, on Thursday, our last lesson, we are going to have an assessment over all of carbon chemistry, everything we've done for the past 3 lessons. Next week on Tuesday, I'll be meeting up and having a video on a review of all of the carbon chemistry that we've done so far. I'm also going to upload your Schoology page with lots and lots of resources to help guide you along the way. Now, before we get out of here completely, I think I need to call over my assistant and see what we can do about wrapping this up. Oh, Daniel!
Ooh, yeah, sunny day and awesome. Thumbs up. Ooh, yeah, it's a sunny day. Flying!
Are those wings?
Yeah, my wings.
That's interesting.
My flying wings.
Are you really going to take off?
Yeah,
I think you're doing great.
I'm flapping my wings. It's, ooh, yeah.